Get ready to break free from conventional thinking. Welcome to Breaking Barriers, conversations on DEIB and talent, where we challenge the norm, ignite change, and shatter barriers to celebrate the power of diversity. Are you ready? And now, your host, the visionary leader and advocate for change, James Dyson Jr.
Welcome again to another episode of Breaking Barriers, conversation on DEI and talent. I am your host, James Dyson Jr. And ladies and gentlemen, if you're looking to bridge the gap between intention and impact, our next guest embodies that journey. With over 2 decades leading change from organizational wellness to fostering inclusive environments. She's not just reshaping communities, she's reshaping the future of leadership and wellness. So let's give a warm welcome to the global educator, mentor, trailblazer, the remarkable Katrina Pilkington. Katrina, so thrilled to have you on.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me here.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's jump into this. How did you get started into the DEIB space?
It's funny that acronym is being used so widely because when I got into this space, it was just life. I was born and raised in a very not diverse area of the state of Florida, being the only coming from first generation immigrant on one side of my family, enslaved roots on the other side of my family, and really feeling like I was excluded just from being myself. And so when I was younger, I really found out that the way to bridge that gap was just to get to know people and find their common thread that they had with me. There's always one that we have. But as I got older and I entered in the workplace, I saw that there was a whole different set of dynamics and skill sets that I needed to learn from being about 19 years old in my first corporate job and then moving through the ranks there. But with that same mentality of let me find what I have in common with people and really focus on that versus focusing on what's different. And I realized that diving into being a leader within a corporate space, that there was a lot of inequities and a lot of unfair treatment for people who were not seen historically as being included. And I wanted to understand more. And so I've blended my lived experience with my knowledge to advocate for people as much as I can.
Wow. I understand that. That's amazing. How did you get into your niche with wellness and DEI?
Yeah. So after that corporate job, I took a sharp left turn and decided to go into the fitness industry and the wellness industry solely because from my personal experience, I was going through a lot of life stuff and I was never really active growing up. So when I started moving and walking and which I still do to this day, it really started making me feel good. And I started noticing that there was another dimension to workplace wellness, which was like holistic wellness. And I wanted to know the ins and outs of human psychology and physiology at the same time. I also went to school, grad school for nutrition, and did a lot of studies around the social determinants of health. Again, wondering why did I feel the way I felt growing up? It's because we grew up in a very low income area, didn't have a lot of access to the right tools. So I wanted to be able to have the right skill set to help people just like myself simplify their wellness and really own what they could control in a set of systems that really aren't made for everybody that we still live in.
Very true. That is very true. How do you see in a corporate setting the wellness and DEI initiatives intersecting, coming together from there?
Yeah, I think it's super multifaceted. It's funny because you would think it's a continuum, but it's not. It's actually all enmeshed together. I've seen a lot of, there's a great book called My Grandmother's Hands, a lot of issues with epigenetics and generational trauma and generational chronic health and disease impacting folks of marginalized and excluded identities. I've seen on the flip side a lot of folks who are not in the global majority from the more, I guess you could say, privileged identities being able to have access to those things and having this sense of I am owed XYZ and that kind of that dichotomy really impacting people in the workplace, especially when you think about different work arrangements that are needed or different communication styles. So how that really impacts people at a visceral level and helping create self-awareness is important to me so that people can, like I said, control the controllable, but at the same time advocate for those that perhaps don't know or don't have access to the same tools they have to take care of themselves. And what can they do about that with a little forgiveness, grace, understanding in that place that we're at for 8+ hours a day called work.
Right. than sitting there. That's a good segue into kind of being a huge proponent of employee rights. And as we had talked before, and just understanding there's a lot of employees that really don't understand what their rights are with organizations, with companies. They feel that they're at the whim of the company, and whatever kind of however the company
Mhm.
sways and goes, they have to go with it, or either they have to leave. And then it just
Mhm.
becomes their whole separate aspect. If
Mhm.
you talk to us just maybe about just some kind of key things about employers' rights, some things that maybe employees don't know that they
Mhm.
do have the right to do within their organization.
Yeah, I think I'm always going to go back to whether it's wellness, employee rights, DEI, et cetera. People have to take ownership of what they can control. So
Right.
nobody else can be your advocate better than you can. It's not to
Right.
say that you need to know everything, but you need to know enough in order to navigate spaces. And even in my own personal experience, having worked for corporate environments, also nonprofits, sometimes I didn't know the histories or the lineage of many organizations and their leadership, but if I had known and had researched more, I might understand how to navigate the space better. So, when it comes to understanding even what's happening right now, if we talk about affirmative action, which I had a conversation with somebody about yesterday, they were asking me, do you feel that's impacting what's happening in DEI today? I said, absolutely. But
Mhm.
also, we have to understand that we still have rights protected under the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that
Yeah.
are what's protecting us from being, for lack of a better term, maybe fired because people don't want certain people in spaces. But then you have to
Yeah.
think about the intersection then of disability and how the Americans with Disabilities Act was only instituted in 1990. It's not that long ago. So when you go into a
Right. Wow.
workplace, especially certain generations of folks who maybe think, oh, I go to work and they should let me do X, Y, Z, but they don't have to. But if you know how to articulate what you need in a way that shows that you're aware, you can then make sure to ask for reasonable accommodations. You can then ask for reasonable work flexibility with the right language.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. It is all about what and being able to come to the table and understanding what you need as an individual and then being able to express those needs out to someone else. That's life lessons. Those are the things we need to do in life with
Right,
people and individuals. And so it carries
right,
over and doing the same thing with our employers and going
right.
from there. So let's go and talk about in the same ilk, workplace and psychological safety. I know maybe some people have heard of it, but if we could give just a light definition and the
Hmm.
importance of it within the organization.
Yeah. And it's interesting because there's a current proposal to create an act that's aligning with workplace psychological safety that's asking for signatures right now. But workplace
Okay.
psychological safety really stems from the four components of psychological safety that people need in order to feel not just safe and well on the outside, but on the inside with our brain psychologically in any given space, whether it's a relationship or a workspace. The first one being inclusion safety, like being safe,
Yeah.
included as you are, not a different version of you in a space or situation. Then you have learner safety, which is being open and able to learn in a way that works for you and your style in any given environment.
Right.
And then you have contributor safety, being able to contribute ideas, thoughts, opinions, input into what, if you're thinking about a workplace, what does that look like for the organization's goals, tasks, etc. And then the top tier being
Right.
challenger safety, being able to enter an environment having many times an antagonistic point of view from leadership or those that make decisions, and still being able to be seen
Yeah.
as somebody who's valuable and safe without fear of retaliation or being seen as somebody who's being argumentative or aggressive. Instead, it's actually being welcomed. And that is essentially what drives innovation at companies if people would just be open to people challenging their ideas.
Right. And and then listening to that, you hear, at least in my head, you hear all of the stereotypes for different types of minorities in the workplace, whether it's
Yeah.
women or whether it's people of color. These are, if there are, that people get so angry sometimes when they talk about things,
Yeah.
or they're so aggressive when they do things, or they do, and having that safe space of understanding, hey, this is who I am, and these are, as long as it's within the bounds of being respectful for everybody, that because
Mhm.
that's on both sides and making sure that, but I can be free to be me. in that
Yeah,
aspect. And if it's opinion that I don't like that somebody is pushing on me, I can push back and not have a
right,
fear of any type of retribution to any
right.
type of situation. Yeah,
Yeah, so
absolutely.
if you blend
Absolutely.
that with what we asked me about workplace wellness, if people can't come into an environment being fully themselves, with room for error,
Yeah.
with room to fail, with room to learn, without room to grow, they're watering
Right.
down a version of themselves that is not safe. They're therefore not being their most authentic self. And that can be destructive on the psychological system. It can be destructive on just the fight or flight tendencies that then impact your body at a physiological level. So it's all intermingled together if it's not done in a very authentic, open, free way.
And that's such an important thing for you to say, the ability to feel free to fail. Like you
Hmm.
have to feel that if you
Hmm.
do mess up, it's not life ending. It's not
Oh,
career ending. It's not job ending. And then because so many people get paralyzed by that fear of doing something wrong, that they aren't their authentic self. They hold back, or they're very tight in situations. And so that's key. I do believe that's very important to have that freedom to fail. It's okay to mess up. We tell our kids that all the time, right? It's okay to make mistakes. You need to make mistakes to learn. And I think as we get older, sometimes we forget that as well.
yeah. And I forget the studies, what they show as far as the percentage, but most of our life lessons that we've learned that are the most impactful are learned through failure, whether it's through relationships, whether
Right.
it's through learning. Like you said, I have a little one myself who every day we actually talk about, what did you fail today at? And I try to make that part of our conversation so that she knows that's what I'm looking for. I can't help you and you can't learn if you're already great at something. You can learn how to make it
Right.
better, but whether we
Yep.
do martial arts or whether we do math together, when we mess up, or if she gets a grade that she's not super stoked about, that's where she's like, oh, I could have done XYZ better. Now let me learn and do it better. But in the workplace, for some reason, I feel leadership and key stakeholders tend to think that when people are hired in, they're supposed to come in, do the job responsibilities to this extraordinary, exceptional level and keep leveling up. But at some point, you're
Right.
going to hit a ceiling if that's the expectation.
Very true. Very true. No, so true. So, can in your experience, what are some common challenges that organizations face when trying to foster a workplace and psychological safety, and how can these challenges be effectively addressed and overcome?
Yeah, well, I can think offhand that the two primary ones being one that I mentioned earlier, the folks that are in leadership or those that want to make changes, not understanding the history of their own organization or not understanding what the overarching goal of the organization is for the greater public. But two, looking
Right.
at the key stakeholders, like I mentioned, and the leadership who is making decisions instead of looking at the staff and the employees to make all the change and do all the trainings and do all the work and make all the miraculous 360 moments happen. Staff and employees are not the ones making decisions. Key leaders are
Right.
the ones making decisions, and they should be the ones that are looking in the mirror 1,000 times more than the staff to say, here's some of my blind spots, here are some of my biases and things that I should change so that I can be a better
Right.
servant leader, not putting the weight on people who are already burnt out, tired, and trying to earn the respect of people who they don't even have access to most times. And
Right.
then I think another thing that I've seen a lot from 2020, especially now through now, is folks wanting to focus on external messaging and vision statements and those, we are going to stand with XYZ lives, but words don't hold a lot of weight, actions do. So, what are you
Right.
doing to drive change? Not what are you saying you're going to do, only to go
Right.
backwards when it feels uncomfortable or you don't want to do those things.
Yeah. That's those are huge things. And I've always said that RG groups, if they are the foundation of your DEIB program within an organization, then you don't have a DEIB organization. Because if you're relying on the underrepresented to essentially pull themselves up to try to make policies, to make changes, to do things to help themselves, you're just emulating what's wrong with
Right.
society. I was like, there's nothing good in that, even though you tout it as an organization. Oh, people can be their authentic self in that bubble, but then company still controls budgets. Company still controls the programs. Companies still
Right.
control everything that's happening with it, but you do it.
Mhm.
But
Right.
we'll control the ability to functionally make it happen to a large extent.
Or like you mentioned earlier, all the stereotypes and stigma that surround so many identities. And I know I hold my own beautiful blend of them, and we all do in this space.
Yeah,
But if you're asking a very excluded identity group of folks to make these changes, but yet you think, oh, that's really assertive, that's very aggressive of them to want these things. I do not understand this. It makes no sense. It doesn't fit budget. And then you've never addressed the reason why you keep saying no. It's never
right.
going to go anywhere. And I've experienced this time and time again, even having been a senior leader in many organizations. Nothing changes if leadership doesn't change. And nothing changes if the goal of the organization is to do something that's completely against DEI principles in the first place. If the goals are
Yeah,
to, for example, be a very, I don't want to say the word elitist, boutique offering of a facility, for example, whether it's fitness, wellness, retail, whatever, that in and of
right.
itself is inequitable. If you're an organization that's a nonprofit that's trying to pull money from folks that are of a certain very privileged identity, you do not
Right.
have DEI at your organization. Like, you have to understand that that's just the way that you are. You can't make change happen. That's not supposed to happen in a given structure.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think we have a lot of DEI efforts often intersect with workplace safety. How
Mhm.
do you, or what would you tell companies to ensure that their initiatives or their DEI initiatives align with and support the goal of creating a psychologically safe workplace for all of their employees?
Yeah, I think organizational leaders have to start by understanding that just because you're doing something that goes against the grain and breaks the status quo does not mean you're going to lose money. It's the number one thing I see organizations do is struggle thinking that if they change this, if they go against the grain and they try something new, oh no, we're going to lose profit. Oh, if we start a sliding scale pay system, for example, we're going to lose money
Right.
because we've always done it this way. That's definitely a trait of um, toxic work culture. I'll call it that in this environment.
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
understanding that you have to be able to be open to the most opposite viewpoint that you've already been used to and know that it's
Yeah.
only for the good of everyone. If you focus on the liberation of the most excluded group of people, it only benefits everybody. It only benefits every single person in a space. But when you're so scared to let go of the things that you hold dear, that you want to clench onto, nothing's
Right.
ever going to change unless you do something different. Um,
Absolutely.
and like you said, as far as workplace safety goes, it doesn't matter if an organizational leadership team or leader is a well meaning human, you can still do harm to folks. Your lack of self awareness
Yes.
can do harm to people. It can discriminate, it can cause psychological harm, it can cause a lawsuit. And that's why I say on the flip end that employees and staff need to know their rights too, because they've probably been exposed to many types of claim type behaviors they have no idea to have noted or documented just because they're gaslit into thinking this is the norm and it's not. It shouldn't be.
And that is so true. And sometimes it's unintentionally, but you can unintentionally cause irreparable damage and harm to people just
Mhm.
because you're just not aware and
Yes.
you haven't tried to become aware of specifically why individuals go through those things and doing that. That's so true. And
Mhm.
you have a very cool chart that you created with the workplace rights and
Yeah.
laws, and it's a roadmap that goes along that shows when each of the acts were passed and what they are. And we'll put that up on the screen and we'll share
Yeah.
that just as we're talking here in a little bit. But it was very interesting, kind of as you said, a lot of these acts are still it's recent. Everything is in now. I know everything now is in 2000. So now
Mm.
you've seen the meme where it starts out with, if you were born in 19 from that
Mhm.
standpoint. But it's the Department of Labor was just, as you said, established in 1913.
Yeah.
Which that's in the grand scheme of things not that long ago.
No.
So it's very telling about a lot of the kind of the workplace rights and laws that have been
Mhm.
established when they were established. And
Mhm.
even now you see so many people whether it's in individual states or whether it's in Congress or whatever, working hard to repeal or change or
Mhm.
modify or nullify
Mhm.
so many of those laws or areas of that law. And
Yeah, absolutely. And I
that,
think
yeah,
people try to tell me all the time, and I'm sure you've heard this, that we should all just focus on what makes us beautiful and we shouldn't look at difference. The unfortunate thing is, this country was built on difference, meaning
right.
that people are going to be inaccessible or not have access to the same offerings. So, for example, if I look at myself and I know all my identities, then I can know which workplace rights apply to me and how that would look. Like if you use yourself as a case study and you use this graphic to go through each one of them, you can understand, okay, so as a person with a invisible disability, for example, I am entitled to asking for flexible work arrangements as long as I am able to go into the office for different in-person events or commitments that are part of my job responsibilities, but I actually can ask to have flexibility. Or if you're somebody from a different socioeconomic situation and you're the caretaker, whether it's a child or
Mm,
parent or other family member, and you need to be there for certain appointments for them, you have the Family Medical Leave Act that can help you do that. The mistake I do see a lot of staff making is they go straight to their direct manager, direct leader, instead of learning on their own first and going straight to people and culture slash HR, who then still don't need all of the details. You can keep a lot of confidentiality around your specific needs, but you yourself should sit down and understand, what are the things in my life that can apply to each one of these types of acts? And are there things that I'm not getting from my work environment? And if so, then I need to be able to articulate that in a way that keeps some sense of privacy, but also is
right.
affirming what I need in the workplace at the same time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And now in our new kind of, we'll say our new normal of more hybrid and remote kind of work situation, how has the concept of workplace and psychological safety evolved? What strategies can companies implement to
Mhm.
maintain and enhance safety with these new remote and hybrid work environments that they're not, quote, physically in the office? So they're
Yeah.
at home, but there's still an aspect of psychological safety that needs to be given to these employees, even when they're working from home.
Yeah. To your earlier point, this is happening a lot where people were like, everybody can work remote. And then all of a sudden it's, oh no. And a lot of it, I have to explain to people, does come with price tags. So whether it's office buildings that companies have leased out and they have a lease for X amount of years, I get all that. But again, you're putting the burden on people who are not the decision makers. It's not somebody's fault that you have a lease for a building that you owe. And therefore, you're going to put the pressure on them to come in, commute through. I live in Miami, so let's talk about Miami. Commute through chaotic
Right.
traffic, irate drivers, only to then 30 plus minutes get to a place where they have to then possibly mask who they are as a person, do the office politics of walking around, saying hello, having all these conversations that they don't typically have to have at home. Then sit down, have focused time and work, get back in the car, then perhaps take care of their family. It's a whole lot for some people. It's not to say that many people don't enjoy that. A lot of people enjoy going into work and
Right.
it makes them feel more productive. So there has to be some sense of a balance, where I've seen a lot of really innovative organizations take their workspace and instead of making it into the typical cubicle style environment, they turn it into a sensory friendly slash relaxing work environment where there's workshops and there's actual nervous system friendly, I call them, offerings for their staff to come
Right.
in as an option to still use the space and still drive positive and work environment change, but not put the pressure on the staff. So I think it's about companies and leaders looking at what they can control, same thing. Being
Yeah.
self-aware to say, okay, what is the amount of years perhaps that we need to use this space, but also what do my people need? What does my team need on an individual and group level to feel cohesive, to work together? No matter what somebody's role is, somebody who's on the road all the time, having to be in front of people all the time, is probably going to burn out quicker than somebody who can have the chance to sit in a quiet environment and decompress and not have to go from meeting to meeting in person.
Right.
It can just depend on the
Yeah.
people.
Absolutely. And a lot of times there are even little things, is whereas I've seen a lot of times for the Zoom meetings. They're forcing people to come up on camera or telling them I need to see your face, or I need to have you here, or I need you to do this. And there's definitely times and place for that. I've always been
Right.
one that feels that if I'm hopping on a Zoom meeting and it's a small meeting, if it's 101 or something like that, and we're on camera, it'd be better to be on camera unless somebody says, hey, something has happened today. I'm not going to be on camera because of X,
Right.
Y, and Z. Okay.
Right.
And that's just my personal feeling. If somebody comes up and they're not on camera, I don't have any problem with it. We talk about it, we figure out what we need to do, and then we keep going. But I've definitely been around some companies where they're like, turn on your camera. It's, we want to see see everybody. It's like, why?
And
right.
you have to examine, what does your trust look like with your staff, and what does work look like? So when you look at a job responsibility list, and I've done this in many roles, am I doing my job? Absolutely. How do I ensure that my leader knows this? It's with constant check-ins, it's with validating the work, it's with due dates, all those typical things. But a lot of that does not mean quote unquote face-to-face time. And being somebody who identifies as neurodivergent, for example, I talk about myself very openly. I've been told many times, you're not paying attention. You're not on video. You're not on camera. We don't see you. 90% of the meetings people have are actually lowering production and productivity for their staff. Staff could actually be working if they're not sitting there captive, looking you in the eyeballs, masking most times, and also just appeasing you so that you can feel that they're doing their job, versus being able to go off camera and process and fidget. Or somebody like myself, who I process in motion. I took many of my meetings on walks or in movement scenarios. That's, people don't process the same, and expecting somebody to sit, just like kids in school, sitting captive is not an indicator of productivity. It's not an indicator of trust. Somebody could be looking you in the face and still not doing what you want them to do. So you have to start making things a little less compliancy driven.
Correct. Right. Yeah, absolutely. I know we've talked about companies taking the ownership, and it has to come from the leaders down, really. And I've always felt if you really want your DEIB organization and practices to have an actual impact or be truly effective, it has to start at the top. A lot of times people will say, we're starting this kind of grassroots organization, and that's great, but that's not going to see change. That's not going to implement any type of change within the organization, because the grassroots do not control the entire organization. And so you end up having to get this groundswell of people going into the leadership to finally get them to change. You almost got to get a march or a rally or something. You got to get a large number of the employees to say, hey, we need to make this change before leadership changes.
Yeah.
And that's very reflective of our culture and our community. And you've seen events from this past weekend with all of the rallies and all of the marches and the protests, of where people are expressing themselves and saying that this isn't right, and this isn't, we don't approve of this, and we don't like this. And then it still comes up to leadership to go, either we hear you or we can turn you off, whichever way. And unfortunately, that's a byproduct of how our society is crafted, and how leaders get into that position, which is, I know people feel that a lot of times that it's fruitless, but I'm like, you got to vote at lower level elections, city, county, all of those make a difference for your state. Senators, representatives, that makes a difference to then the larger election. The president's is always the big show election, but that's not really the one that has the most impact.
And we have to let people
it's all
know
of the small.
They have to work together and not apart. I think, as you and I talked about, there's today with lots of things that are going on with elections, it's important that people don't just vote, but they also organize. I've seen so many unions popping up. I have a lot of friends that work in the unionizing space, and it's important for people to understand there are different power types at play. So staff and employees have relationship power, they have influential power, they have skill and knowledge power that they're not using, because they think that hierarchical power is the only kind of power that exists in a space. And yes, I wish that most work environments were not hierarchical, and that they were more focused on holistic sideways, lateral, parallel leadership. But for right now, they're very hierarchical. But hierarchical leaders need to understand that
Right.
their employees do have power and they're being empowered. And them taking their power away is not going to make it better. It's them linking arms and working together that will make a huge difference overall.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And those are fantastic lessons that companies and DEI executives and leaders can take away to continue to work with your executive team and leaders and really get them to understand that until you all take the step forward, this is what it is. It's going to be a brand and marketing show. And
Right.
if that's what you want with your organization, okay, that's fine. You can have it, but it'll never be any more than that. But I think getting them to understand that. And Katrina, thank you so much for being here today, coming on and talking with us. How can people find you? How can people get in contact with you, learn more about your experiences and what you have to offer?
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation for sure. People can reach out to me on Instagram at The Real Heel Feels, and also the same website. And my email address is just Katrina at therealheelfeels.com. Happy to consult or talk to folks even about their personal experience if they need guidance or advocacy direction anytime.
Perfect. Fantastic. We will put all of that information up when we post the podcast up, so you'll have that information from there. So thank you again. I really appreciate your time, Katrina. This has been absolutely amazing. And thank you for working with me through our technical difficulties from before, but this has been fun. And I look forward to talking with you more. We go from here.
Thank you. I always appreciate diving into these topics. It's how we expand understanding by getting a little uncomfortable.
That's absolutely well. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here on another episode of Breaking Barriers, Conversation in DEI and Talent. I look forward to seeing you again on our next episode. Until then, take care and be safe.
Thank you for listening and joining us on Breaking Barriers, Conversations on DEIB and Talent. Stay tuned for more episodes as we continue to challenge norms, amplify diverse voices, and celebrate the power of inclusion. Together, let's shape a world where everyone's talents are recognized and celebrated. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a review. Your support helps us reach more listeners and continues to bring you thought-provoking content.